My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 4 years, I've been married to a man I thought was my partner, someone who would always have my back. But as time went on, I realized I wasn't just married to him, I was married to his entire family. And they had made it very clear that I was nothing more than an outsider. It wasn't always this bad. When we first got together, his mom, Linda, was sweet, almost too sweet. She'd fawn over me, call me such a catch, and tell everyone how lucky her son was. At first, I thought she was just being welcoming, but looking back, I think she was trying to size me up, trying to figure out what she could get out of me. You see, I come from money. Not the flashy, brag about it kind, but the kind where I've never had to worry about making rent, and vacations were always in places with white sand and five-star resorts. I never led with that. I worked hard, made my own career, and never relied on my family's wealth. But the moment Linda found out, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just Emily. I was rich Emily. She started making little comments. At first, they were small, like, "Oh, you probably don't know how to cook since you grew up with chefs," or, "I bet you don't even have to budget." Huh? But over time, the resentment in her voice became less subtle. "I can't imagine what my son sees in someone so spoiled," she said once. I laughed it off, thinking she was just messing around, but I should have known better. Her attitude rubbed off on my husband, Daniel. He wasn't like that when we first met. He was kind, independent, ambitious. But the longer we were together, the more I noticed how easily he let his mother's opinions seep into his own thoughts. He'd roll his eyes when I ordered something expensive at a restaurant, even though I was the one paying. He'd scoff when I talked about my job, acting like my success was just handed to me. And then, the worst part, he started making me feel guilty for not sharing more of my wealth with his family. At first, it was small. His parents were struggling with their mortgage, and he asked if I could help them out. I didn't even think twice. I covered it. Then, it became a regular thing. They needed new appliances, then a new car, then money for emergencies that never really felt like emergencies. And every time, Linda acted like I owed them. I started feeling less like a wife and more like an ATM. Things reached a breaking point a few months ago. I was exhausted from carrying so much of the financial weight in our marriage. I tried to talk to Daniel about it, but he just brushed me off. "You have so much, Em," he said one night. "Why does it even matter?" That's when I realized something. It didn't matter to him because he didn't see me as an equal partner. He saw me as a resource. I started pulling back, quietly preparing my exit. I stopped paying for things, let the bills pile up in his name. I wanted to see how long it would take before he realized that I wasn't just some endless supply of money. He didn't even notice, at least, not right away. But Linda did. Which brings me to Christmas. Every year, we go to his parents' house. It's never a pleasant experience for me, but I go because I don't want to deal with the fallout of skipping it. This year, though, things felt different. There was a smugness to Linda, a little too much glee in her voice when she greeted me at the door. The house was decorated beautifully, the smell of cinnamon and pine in the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dinner was the usual passive-aggressive nightmare. Linda made a point to mention how hard times had hit their family, throwing a pointed glance at me, as if my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was some personal attack. Daniel barely spoke to me the whole night, too busy talking with his dad and brother, as if I wasn't even there. Then, after dinner, it was time for gifts. I sat on the couch, watching as presents were passed around. Linda handed a beautifully wrapped box to Daniel, another to his brother, one to her husband, one to her daughter-in-law. Even the grandkids got a stack of gifts. The room was filled with the sound of tearing paper and excited laughter. I waited, and waited, and then I noticed something. There was nothing for me. Linda must have seen the realization on my face, because she smiled. A slow, satisfied smile, the kind a cat gives before it pounces on a wounded bird. "Oh dear," she said, voice dripping with false concern. "Did we forget someone?" Daniel chuckled beside me. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I felt a slow burn in my chest. I wasn't angry about the gifts. I didn't need anything from these people. But the sheer audacity of it, the deliberate, calculated cruelty, was something else. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted me to feel small. I looked at Linda, matching her smile. "That's okay," I said, my voice light. "I didn't forget about you." Her smile faltered just a little. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. It wasn't much, just a single slip of paper inside. But as I handed it to her, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She hesitated before taking it. And when she opened it, when she realized exactly what I'd given her, her face drained of color. I leaned back in my seat, enjoying the silence that fell over the room. Linda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel peered over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the paper. The moment he understood, his expression shifted, his smugness vanishing in an instant. The rest of the family, still caught up in their gifts, hadn't noticed the shift yet. But they would, because this wasn't just some last-minute Christmas present. This was something I had been preparing for weeks. Something that was about to change everything. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. Linda's fingers tightened around the paper, her knuckles going white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, scrambling for a way to twist this, to regain control. Daniel, sitting beside her, was quicker. His head snapped toward me, his voice coming out in a harsh whisper. "Emily, what is this?" I just smiled, taking a slow sip from my glass. "Oh, you haven't figured it out yet?" I tilted my head, feigning concern. "It's a notice, Daniel. A rather important one." Linda's hands were shaking now as she reread the paper, her eyes darting across the words like she could somehow will them to change. But they wouldn't, because what she held in her hands was a formal notice from the bank. Effective immediately, the mortgage payments on their home, the ones I had been covering for the past 3 years, were no longer being paid. Linda sucked in a breath, her gaze snapping up to me. "You can't do this," she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. "I can." And I did. The color in her face went from ghostly pale to a deep, blotchy red. She looked ready to explode, but I wasn't finished. "You see, Linda," I continued, my voice light and almost amused, "for years, I've been paying for this house. Your house. Out of my own pocket. And you never even had the decency to thank me for it. No, instead, you spent that time mocking me, belittling me, and treating me like I was nothing more than a walking wallet." I took another sip of my drink, savoring the tension in the air. "So I decided to give you a real gift this year. Responsibility." The room had gone eerily silent. Daniel looked between me and his mother, his hands curling into fists. "You're overreacting," he said through gritted teeth. "This is petty, Emily." "Petty?" I let out a small laugh. "You mean like deliberately excluding me from Christmas? Like making sure I was the only one sitting here without a gift while you all laughed about it?" I set my glass down and met his gaze head on. "No, Daniel. This isn't petty. This is fair." Linda let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You think this makes you look good? You think this makes you the bigger person?" She shook the paper in her hand like that would somehow undo it. "You're just proving what we always knew. You're selfish." I sighed dramatically. "Ah, yes, the rich girl is selfish for not endlessly funding her in-laws. How tragic." I leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Linda. I don't owe you anything. I never did. But I gave, and I gave, and I gave anyway. And instead of gratitude, I got sneers. So forgive me if I'm fresh out of generosity. You can't just stop paying," she snapped, her voice rising in desperation. I smiled again. "Oh, but I can. The mortgage was in my name, remember?" I shrugged. "You'll have to figure things out on your own now. I suggest you start looking at job listings." Her mouth fell open. The reality of it was finally sinking in. For years, they had lived comfortably under the illusion that my money would always be there to catch them, that I would always be there to fix their problems. Not anymore. Daniel stood up abruptly, towering over me, his face twisted in frustration. "You're being ridiculous, Emily. This affects me too." I tilted my head. "Yes, it does." My voice was calm, but my heart was racing. "But you made your choice. You let them treat me like garbage, and you laughed right along with them. So now you can all deal with the consequences together." His jaw clenched. "We're married. For now." That shut him up. Linda, still clutching the paper like a lifeline, finally seemed to realize that screaming at me wouldn't fix this. She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "You have to fix this," she whispered. "Talk to her. Make her change her mind." Daniel hesitated, looking at me with something that almost resembled pleading. "Emily, let's just talk about this later, okay?" I let out a breathy laugh. "Oh, Daniel, there is no later." I stood up, grabbing my purse. "Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you enjoy your gifts." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving them to sit in their perfect little holiday scene, except now, the reality of what I had just done was settling over them like a storm cloud. For the first time, they were going to have to face the world without my money. And that, I thought as I stepped out into the cold night air, was the best Christmas present I could have ever given myself. As I stepped outside, The crisp winter air hit me like a refreshing slap. It was freeing, liberating, almost poetic. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled chaos unfolding in the house, Linda's shrill voice, Daniel's panicked attempts to calm her down, the general hum of a Christmas celebration gone horribly wrong. I smiled. Merry Christmas to me. Sliding into my car, I took a deep breath. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying suddenly felt lighter. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Linda wasn't the type to let go of her golden goose without a fight, and Daniel, well, he had been under her thumb for so long, I wasn't sure he even knew how to think for himself anymore. Sure enough, before I even had a chance to pull out of the driveway, my phone started buzzing. Daniel. I ignored it. Then came the texts. Danny texted, "Oh, Emily, come back inside. We need to talk. This isn't funny. You're ruining Christmas. We can fix this. Just stop being dramatic. Are you seriously leaving over a few presents?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. A few presents. That was rich. Before I could even put my car in drive, a shadow moved across my windshield. My stomach twisted as I realized who it was. Linda. She was standing directly in front of my car, arms crossed, a look of pure, unfiltered rage twisting her face. The cold wind whipped at her perfectly styled hair, but she didn't seem to care. She was on a mission. I rolled down my window just slightly. "Move, Linda." She took a step closer. "We need to talk." I sighed, already regretting this. "I think we've talked enough for one night." Her lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smile but looked more like a baring of teeth. "I don't think you understand what you're doing here, sweetie." Ah, there it was. Sweetie. That condescending little nickname she had used for me since the day I married her son. It had never been affectionate, only ever a thinly veiled way of reminding me that, in her eyes, I was beneath her. I stared at her, unmoved. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Her fake smile wavered. "Do you really? Because this house, this family, this is Daniel's life. Which means it's your life too. You're not just punishing me, you're punishing him." I tilted my head. "And?" Her nostrils flared. "And?" She repeated, like she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately crumbling under her words. "You're going to ruin everything over a little holiday drama?" I let out a small laugh. "Linda, this isn't about Christmas presents. It never was. This is about respect. Something you've never given me." She scoffed. "Respect? You're leaving your husband and his family out in the cold over money. That's not respect, that's selfishness." I shook my head, my patience running dangerously low. "No, what's selfish is expecting me to bankroll your life while you mock me behind my back. What's selfish is laughing while I sit there humiliated on Christmas morning." I leaned slightly out of the window, my voice sharp as ice. "So tell me, Linda, where was your respect?" For the first time, she hesitated. I could see the wheels turning in her head, scrambling for another angle, another way to manipulate me. But I was done playing her games. I put my hand on the gear shift. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd really like to go home." Her face hardened. "This isn't over." I smiled. "Oh, I'm counting on that." With that, I rolled up my window and revved my engine just enough to make my point. She finally stepped aside, her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway. But even as I drove away, I knew Linda wasn't going to take this loss lightly. No, she was going to fight. And I was ready for her. I arrived home just before midnight, the house feeling eerily quiet. The holiday lights I'd left up looked strange now, almost mocking. It had been the kind of Christmas where you couldn't wait to be over, but here I was, alone. For the first time in years, the thought of being alone didn't feel so bad. I tossed my coat on the chair and kicked off my boots. Pouring myself a drink, I sank into the couch, finally allowing myself to feel something other than the frustration that had been building up for months. The front door slammed just as I was about to take a sip, and my stomach dropped. I knew who it was. Daniel. He stormed into the living room, his face red with anger. "Emily, what is your problem?" His voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and frustration. I looked up from my glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip before setting it down. "I think the problem is pretty clear, Daniel." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth in front of me. "You really think this was the right move? You embarrassed me, embarrassed us, in front of my family." His voice was rising with each word. "You're seriously just going to walk out like that?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're mad because I walked out? Or are you mad because I wasn't the one being humiliated?" That hit harder than I expected. Daniel's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with a mix of hurt and anger. "This isn't about you, Emily. This is about us. About me. I need you to understand that. You think I want to be stuck in the middle of all this? You think I want to choose between you and my mother? I stood up, my calmness betraying the storm inside me. You chose her a long time ago, Daniel. Every time you laughed with her, every time you looked the other way, you chose her. He shook his head, his eyes desperate. That's not fair. She's my mother. Exactly. And you've let her run your life. For years, I've been nothing more than the person who pays the bills while you're caught up in her drama. Do you know how humiliating that is? He took a step toward me, his face softening for just a second. I didn't mean for things to get like this, Emily. But this is my family. I can't just cut them out. I laughed bitterly. You can't just cut them out? You can't? I've been paying your mother's mortgage for the last 3 years, Daniel. But the second I ask for a little respect, you tell me I'm being unreasonable. Who's the one being selfish now? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and ran his hand through his hair again. You know I never wanted this. I never asked you to pay for everything. But you just kept doing it, and now you're acting like I'm the one who asked for it. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. You didn't ask for it, Daniel. But you sure didn't stop it. You didn't step in when she insulted me, or when she made me feel like I was nothing more than a charity case. I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding in my chest. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? Daniel stood there, silent, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything we'd been avoiding for so long had suddenly hit him. But then he shook his head again, almost like he was trying to shake off the reality of it all. I don't know what you want from me, Emily. I don't know how to fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. His face, the face I'd once loved, was now clouded with confusion and exhaustion. But I was done making excuses for him. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to choose me. For once. But you can't, can you? You're too busy trying to please your mother, trying to play the victim in all of this. I don't want to be the victim, he muttered, his voice low. But I don't know what else to do. Everything's falling apart, Emily. I shook my head. No, you are falling apart. This was never about me and you, Daniel. This was about you not being able to stand up for yourself. You let her take control of everything, and now you're blaming me for it. He took a deep breath, like he was trying to calm himself down. But I could see the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. Maybe we should just take a break, he said, almost under his breath. My heart twisted in a way I didn't expect. It stung, but I held my ground. A break. I repeated. You think that's what we need? A break? I've been living in a constant state of break for years, Daniel. And now you're telling me we need more time apart to figure it out? Maybe we do, he shot back. Maybe I need space to breathe, to think. I let out a harsh laugh, stepping back. You know what? Maybe that's for the best. Because if you need time to figure out if you want to stand by me or stay under your mother's thumb, then we're already done. His face softened, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Emily, please don't. But I wasn't listening anymore. I turned away, my eyes burning with unshed tears. Merry Christmas, Daniel, I said coldly, before walking up the stairs and into the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, taking in shaky breaths. I knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it felt like a turning point, like I had finally taken control of my life. Finally. And no matter what happened next, I wouldn't be the one to back down. Not this time. It's been a few months since that night. A lot has changed since Daniel and I had that fight. I honestly thought it would be the end of everything of him, of his family, of the life we'd built. But as time passed, I realized I was more relieved than I expected. At first, it was hard. I'll admit, I had doubts. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I had made the wrong decision. The truth is, leaving him felt like giving up, but staying felt like giving in. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his mother and the years of toxic behavior I'd been blindly accepting. I thought I could ignore it, push it down, make excuses. But now, I see how unhealthy it all was. Daniel tried reaching out a few times in those early weeks, sending texts and even calling. At first, I ignored him. Then, one day, I thought I'd at least hear him out. We met at a cafe. He looked tired, worn out, and the usual spark in his eyes was gone. He was like a shadow of the man I once knew. But the thing that struck me the most was how much he looked like he wanted me to fix everything. I could see it in his face, the helplessness, the desperation. But I didn't feel the need to fix him anymore. Emily, I'm sorry, he started, his voice shaky. I should have stood up for you. I should have put you first. But my mom, she's always been so overwhelming. I didn't know how to deal with it. I took a slow breath. Daniel, I'm not mad at you anymore. I'm just tired. I'm tired of pretending everything was fine when I was the one doing all the heavy lifting. I was paying for your family's house, covering the bills, while you let her treat me like dirt. He looked like he wanted to interrupt, but I kept talking. And you kept laughing at me with her. It wasn't a joke anymore. You were complicit, and you let me feel small in my own home. Do you know what that feels like? To be the one who's always giving, always sacrificing, while no one even sees it. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with something close to regret. I never meant for it to be that way, Em. I thought I was doing the right thing, trying to keep the peace. But I see now that I was just letting you down. I nodded slowly, watching his face crumble under the weight of my words. You were, Daniel. You were. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see him struggling to find the right words. But the truth was, I didn't need to hear them anymore. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for something that wasn't there. Change. I'm not coming back, I finally said, my voice firm. I'm done with all of it. Done with you, done with your family. I don't need their approval to be happy. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but then stopped himself. Instead, he just nodded, the reality of it sinking in. Since then, I've had the space to finally breathe, really breathe. The weight on my chest that I'd carried for so long was finally lifted. I had time to focus on myself, on what I really wanted. I started spending more time with friends who supported me, people who made me feel good about myself. And as for Daniel, I haven't heard from him much. A couple of text messages here and there, but no real attempt to rekindle anything. I don't think he knows how to fix things, or maybe he's just too wrapped up in his own mess to see it clearly. But I've realized something important during all of this. I don't need to fix him. I don't need to carry the burden of his family's toxicity anymore. And if he's not willing to change, then I can't force it. I don't care how much he regrets it. I don't care how sorry he is. I don't owe him anything. It's funny, really. All these years, I thought I was the problem. But now I see that the problem wasn't me, it was them. Daniel, his mom, that whole family. They took, and I gave. I thought it was love. But love doesn't make you feel small. It doesn't make you feel invisible. And it sure doesn't make you feel like an afterthought. As for the mortgage, I'm no longer paying it. The bank came knocking on their door a few months ago, and Daniel called me, asking if I could step in again. I said no. I didn't even give him a reason. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. They had to figure it out on their own. And it wasn't easy, but it's not my problem anymore. What's left now is mine to rebuild, and I'll do it on my own terms.